Good evening, everyone. My name is Matthew Ogden, and I'd like to welcome you to a live broadcast from LaRouchepack.com. Tonight is February 15th, 2013, and you're joining us for our regular Friday night webcast featuring Mr. Lyndon Larouche. Tonight in the studio, we have Jason Ross and Leandra Bernstein joining us for the discussion period after Mr. Larouche's opening remarks. I'm sure what Mr. Larouche says tonight will be very significant regarding today's developments, so I'd like to give him to you right away.
Well, there are several things to be taken up which are of notable importance. Of course, one of them is what's happened in Siberia and all over the press today, so I don't think that really is still news. I think there's aspects of it which are newsworthy, and news important also. But however, the key thing that faces us internationally, which is still the leading issue throughout the planet, is the question of Glass-Steagall. We have internationally, the relevant crumb bums have all come out and threatened people over the issue of Glass-Steagall, denying it. Now, the answer is, if Glass-Steagall were to be prevented from being instituted, the result would be the greatest hatred ever conceived against the people responsible. Because what the cancellation or the prevention of Glass-Steagall would do would cause a general breakdown crisis of the entire Atlantic system. Now, what you've got on why do these idiots do that? Why do these criminals do that? Because their life, their ego, their sense of identity is located in the great speculation which this represents. But we've come to the point that if they should act as they intend to, and I know what they intend to do, anyone should be able to understand what they intend to do. They signaled it clearly to me. And if I know it, I think some other people also know it. That the effect of their putting Glass-Steagall through would be a general breakdown crisis of the entire world system. Now, this would include a step which would be the elimination of Ben Bernanke. Because what they would do is they would not try to bail out Ben Bernanke in his operation. They would do something much nastier. They would dump Ben Bernanke, dump the existing financial system itself, ignore the system they canceled, and put in their own new system, which would mean the vast mass of debt, which is represented by the monetarist operation, would be canceled. In its place, they would have a new system of finances, which ignores entirely all the obligations associated with the old, which would mean that most of the people of the world would be starving to death quickly. This has happened before in certain ways. You had speculation in the 18th century. What was going on in the middle of the United States, or what became the United States. The great speculation. And what happens in a case like this, the amount of debt outstanding on account of this bailout system, a monetarist system, of easing, a financial easing, a monetary easing, it's got to be canceled. So there will be no such money available. There will be no such reserves. What will happen will be an international cabal will create a new system of money, which will be much smaller, much more feasibly handled than the present one. What will happen to all the people who were excluded from the use of this more limited quantity of money? They will starve to death. And that's the intention behind what this President of the United States presently is doing. That doesn't mean he's the author of it. It means what they've signaled, because you cannot possibly pull off what they say they intend to do. There's no way you can bail out this system except by canceling it and putting in an absolutely new one. Now, this has happened before, but on a much more limited scale. So you can imagine the effect that if they proceed with this operation and were to succeed in pushing through the objections to Glass-Steagall, and are forced to unleash the debts which they're trying to hide now, it won't work. What they will simply do, have to replace and cancel the debts outstanding now under the present arrangement, and come in with much more modest ones, but they pay them to rich people, which means there'll be still less for the people otherwise. This goes together with the Queen's project for reducing the population of the planet from about 7 billion people to the order of 1 billion people. That's exactly what they've planned. And anyone who's going along with this opposition to Glass-Steagall from here on is going to be denounced internationally by me and by others as mass murderers. They'll be the most unpopular people crawling around or slithering around the planet. And that's exactly where we're headed. Now, a lot of people don't want to think of things sometimes that they think are too frightening. They are easily scared. All these pompous asses are easily scared. Just a little whimper of a donkey's bray, and they'll scatter to the winds. But those who intend to do things, such as the British Queen and other people of that sort, are mass murderers when they think it's necessary to be so. And that's what we're faced with. So anybody who's telling you that Glass-Steagall is not to be enacted is actually acting on behalf of mass murderers. And most of the people of the United States are the indicated victims, among others. So that's where we stand this date. That's the issue. They put the issue on the platter. I know exactly what they're doing because I know how systems work. And what they're doing, the only way it will work, is cancel the entire bailout system. Just wipe it off the plate and come in with a new system in which people who are privileged will be bought into that system, and they will be given relatively good incomes to live on, but unfortunately the greater majority of the population will have none. This is the greatest population reduction scheme so far in known history. And that's what the policy of the people who oppose Glass-Steagall is, whether they themselves know it or not. But they will be held accountable for the effect of that policy. And that's where we stand. And that's the main issue. Now we have other issues which are of a completely different nature, which are quite popular now because they suddenly blasted their way into our consciences. And it started in places in Russia, where suddenly a swooping thing shot through the atmosphere at extraordinary speeds and made a mess of things for about 1,000 people or more immediately. What this movie has shown is that the entire world system is now subject from outside the immediate vicinity of the Earth, is shooting across our bow and requires a very active SDI operation in order to defend humanity against effects like that, which were demonstrated in Russia today and yesterday. So that's the other issue. So you've got two issues. One, the key issue is if the opponents of Glass-Steagall continue to proceed, they're going to be among the most hated people on the planet. And I don't think the hatred will be in any sense mild. When you are taking a mass of human beings and condemning them to death by starvation and similar means, they ain't going to be happy. And neither will the victims, the new victims, the one who are considered guilty of this crime, as complicity in this crime. So they better get on to Glass-Steagall real fast, or there's going to be a terrible amount of bloodshed spread around this planet. And those who are saying and threatening people against Glass-Steagall are themselves the imminent targets of vengeance.
Thank you very much. You're watching a live broadcast from LaRouchepack.com. I'd like to ask Leandra Bernstein to come up to the podium to present the first question.
Thank you, Matthew. So there are obviously some major questions outstanding on Glass-Steagall based on the flurry of developments that we've seen this week, but I'd like to preface this question by putting out the call to all of the activists around LaRouchePAC to immediately contact your member of Congress, your representative in the House, to sign on to H.R. 129, which is a Marcy Kaptur bill for the reinstatement of Glass-Steagall. It's the exact identical bill to H.R. 1489, which was in the House last session. So if your congressperson signed on last session and has not put their name on this session, tell them to get cracking. And as far as the Senate goes, there is not yet a Glass-Steagall bill in the Senate. There must be a Glass-Steagall bill in the Senate. And this is of the utmost urgency if you take seriously Lyndon Larouche's opening remarks here. This is of the utmost urgency. We have tools on our website that you can use to find your congressperson if you don't know who they are and contact them. So that's just in sort of a preface to these recent developments. Now, I'll say that it has been a very rough time for Obama, especially his nominees. It was notable this week that Jack Lew, during his Senate confirmation hearing, was confronted with a very significant question from Senator Maria Cantwell from Washington, asking, do you believe in Glass-Steagall, in restoring Glass-Steagall? Now, Lew answered like anybody you would expect from a member or prospective member of the Obama cabinet. He said, no, it's anachronistic, and, wasted his breath. Maria Cantwell had to say, so I take that as a no. But what is significant is Maria Cantwell, for those who remember, she was, along with Senator John McCain, the sponsor of the Glass-Steagall Amendment to the 2010 Wall Street Reform Act, which became the Frank Dodd Bill. And that amendment was viciously crushed by the Obama administration as soon as it came up. But now it's come up again this week. Today, again, in a Senate Banking Committee meeting, West Virginia Senator Manchin brought up Glass-Steagall to a member of the Federal Reserve, questioning a member of the Federal Reserve, saying, if I understand it, this law was on the books for over 60 years. It was true, it was eroded in the 1970s and 1980s, but we did not have the kind of crises that we have today since the repeal. So my question is, why aren't we discussing bringing back Glass-Steagall, bringing back the Glass-Steagall legislation? And it was actually an interesting response because it harkened back to the argument from Alan Greenspan from his 1984 pamphlet on taking down Glass-Steagall, saying we have to be competitive with the European universal banks. Well, we're very competitive with the European banks right now, on the way to the bottom. But anyway, so along with these developments, Jacques Cheminade was interviewed on a major French television program where he was able to speak extensively on banking separation and Glass-Steagall in particular. These developments out of the Senate, very important. There are developments coming out of the state houses in the state legislatures, which are going to be highly significant, which we'll be covering on the website in the near future. But the question that has come in from an institutional contact that this contact wants to know what your reading is of what these developments, these voices, mean for the United States and for Europe.
Well, you have to understand something in general when you approach a question of this momentous quality. First of all, there are about 5% of the members of Congress have the guts, potentially, to raise a question like this seriously. Because most of them are go-along to get along candidates, members of Congress. Go along to get along. Huh? The same old refrain which leads us down to the pathway right into hell. And that's that kind of thing. That's the issue here. So the problem is not what's right. That is a challenge. That is an important issue. The question, who has the guts to do the right thing? And there's scant numbers among the members of Congress who have the guts to do what has to be done. Now, I've always referred to the alternative. If we don't get Glass-Steagall, you're going to get an explosion inside the entire U.S. and transatlantic system, which will blow the guts out of it, and there will be no further bailout. There will be essentially sending Ben Bernanke off someplace because he's no longer going to be around, because his usefulness is all used up. He's worthless now, because the only intention that can exist under the leadership of the British Empire, and that's where it's coming from, is to cut out whole categories of obligations, monetary obligations, cut short the list of those and amounts of what will be uttered, and utter only, chiefly, to the big important people of that rank and the few people they consider necessary in their environment. We're headed for, as I've just said before a few minutes ago, we're headed for the greatest genocide ever perpetrated against mankind in terms of the opposition to Glass-Steagall. And that cannot be held secret much longer, because you've got a broken down system. That system is broken. There's no way they can get out of it except by canceling it. Cancel the debt. On what grounds? Expediency. Expediency. And that's where the problem lies. We are now at a point where the American people, who are trying to behave like gutless wonders, especially those in the Congress and similar places, where they're trying to hide from the issues, which is what they do the best at. They can always take an issue and bounce it around for, session to session and accomplish nothing. But it comes up like Grandpa every time. And it never does anything. Grandpa just clumps on his pipe, his corncob pipe, and sits there and puffs, and sessions of Congress go and come. He remains there puffing on his pipe, and nothing is done. What will happen then is, therefore, if you think about feasibility, there is no source for the existing listed money in the system now. It does not exist. Therefore, what are they going to do? They, the inveterate they, are going to cancel this money, cancel this debt on grounds of necessity, which they don't do otherwise, and to come up with a smaller amount of credit, of money credit, which will then be awarded to people who are considered of categories which are considered essential. And the many, many, many non-essential people left over will be left to die. That is what's on the table now. If you understand the reading of the figures, if you understand the raw data which is involved in this whole business, the fact that this quantitative easing has now come to past the end of its continued existence. Now, what do? We've had great bubbles in the past. France has had a number of bubbles. You had them in the Louisiana bubbles and so forth in that century. Now we've come to a granddaddy version of that same thing. The debts which are represented by Western Europe, by the United States and others on the financial markets are such that they can no longer be bailed over. There are no resources to actually do a net bailover. Therefore, the alternative which has been used in some cases in the past is they simply will issue new money and scrap the old. And that is not something because they went into a dark room and schemed. That will be done because that is the only alternative that their system will allow. So anyone who's in that department as opposed to Glass-Steagall is your personal enemy. And you have to understand that, and you have to scare the pants off them, otherwise they'll do just that.
All right, that being said, I have to ask a follow-up question because there's a lot of pressure coming down on leaders in the transatlantic. In the Congress in particular, there are people saying, if you put through Glass-Steagall or even talk seriously about it, you will be held responsible for the crash of the whole financial system. There are people who are putting forth these absurd proposals, so-called Glass-Steagall proposals. Even a champion of Glass-Steagall during her campaigning, Elizabeth Warren, apparently wishes to give Dodd-Frank some time to work, whatever that means. I think you've said, but. And then people talking about Sherrod Brown having a proposal to separate banks not by function, which Glass-Steagall would do, but by size, which again, so they're being threatened, they're being disoriented, but I'd just like to clarify what you're saying, because what you have said on this program before is that Glass-Steagall would wipe out the nominal assets, the hyperinflationary assets, the bailout money.
Yeah.
But is what you're talking about similar to what happened post-Weimar hyperinflation, where there was a hyperinflation and then a sudden deflation, where Hjalmar Schacht, who was Adolf Hitler's future finance minister, came in, introduced a new currency, and the austerity that tore through, is this what you're discussing, the austerity that tore through Germany post hyperinflation? I think it would be useful, because you've said we would wipe these assets out, but you're also saying the opponents of Glass-Steagall will wipe these assets out. So just to clarify.
Okay. Now the point is that, as in the Schacht case, remember Hjalmar Schacht was operating under the authority of the Bank of England. So that in a sense, that was the same mechanism which I'm talking about now, except the circumstances are different. At that point, the British managed, with the support of the United States, with the Wall Street crowd, managed to support Adolf Hitler. That's what they did. They made some adjustments later, but that's what they did. Now you've got a situation in which the degree of hyperinflation, which presently exists, especially in the transatlantic system, but throughout the world at large, the entire system is now hyperinflated to the point that it can no longer continue to exist on its present books. In other words, this is a doomsday situation. Now, for me, it's not a doomsday situation because I know, okay, if we cancel all this worthless money, cancel all this worthless debts, gambling debts, Barry Bernanke or whatever. If we do that, then we can survive. We will then be able to survive if we do two things. First of all, we have to install Glass-Steagall immediately. If you don't include Glass-Steagall immediately, you're not a patriot of the United States. You may think you are, but you're not in reality. The only way we can save the United States in some reasonable way and save and protect the people of the United States is to install Glass-Steagall now. Anyone who doesn't do that is a traitor to the United States, whether they intend that or not. Because there is no solution for the people of the United States without Glass-Steagall. Because the hyperinflation which has been built up in the transatlantic system is so enormous, there's no ability in the world at large to continue to sustain it. This is a breakdown system. And that's the issue. Now, at that point, you say, well, what are you going to do? Well, you're going to get rid of that worthless money, those worthless debts. They're not honest debts. They're gambling debts. There was no purchase of anything. It was gambling. They went into a gambling game, like the board game of, famous board game. And it's a gambling game. They're gambling debts. They're not debts on the basis of product, of producing something. They're not claims on reality. They're gambling debts. So the gambling debts are so large. So what are we going to do with the gambling debts? We'll cancel them. If they are gambling debts, cancel them. And then put Glass-Steagall into effect. Now, Glass-Steagall, as people should know, has two features. One is the features which are known, which is a memory of Franklin Roosevelt's actions. But we're now in a different situation, a far different situation. Glass-Steagall is still the only thing that works. But it doesn't work by itself anymore. Why? Because the amount of credit in the system is so small, even after you strip off all the fake money, the fake debts, that you don't have enough to keep an economy going. So therefore you have to have a credit system which will supply employment, productive employment, for enough people on the basis of a credit system. That means you have to actually create government-controlled credit. Government control, I say, because it's not just government credit, it's government-controlled credit for useful projects, to employ people, get them to produce things which are necessary, important. In other words, to have an actual productive employment approach. And that would, within, say, a generation, or at most 2 generations, we would have created in the United States, the greatest system of economy the world has ever seen. Now they have the alternative. They can go to hell, and that's where they'll go if they continue to oppose Glass-Steagall, because the debts of this nation, the hyperinflation of debt in this nation, is such that no one can sustain this as long as that obligation, or those so-called nominal obligations, are upheld. There just simply is not enough means to sustain this. It's now at a point of blowout. Now, the point is, what you say, well, these are gambling debts. Well, just what do you do in a case like that? The nation cancels the gambling debts per se. You cancel. We don't recognize gambling debts anymore. We said it was a mistake to do it in the first place. But those are, what we're talking about is the defense of gambling debts, not debts on the basis of production or goods purchased. In other words, they're fake debts. They're debts which, under a moral principle, should never have been allowed. We're eating people's bodies. We're eating their children. We're killing them with these policies. And policies which are being supported by and are condoned by members of the Senate and House of Representatives, by a bunch of stinking cowards called our representatives, our congressional representatives. Stinking cowards who won't stand up to defend the human species against the worst travesty ever conceived. So when the time has come, Either mankind has the moral capability of fitness to survive, or mankind, including our mankind, is going to lose the fitness to survive. And that will come very soon. We're now on the very edge of the explosion. Glass-Steagall now or go to hell. Those are your two choices.
Well, I'd like to ask you about the other event that you brought up at the beginning as well, about our heavenly visitors we've been experiencing today. Today we had two close encounters. One of them, one asteroid, 2012 DA-14, passed 17,000 miles from the Earth, which is closer than a number of our satellites that we have surrounding our planet. The other one, as you described, which exploded over Russia, which I'm sure people have seen on the news and YouTube at this point, it was about 15 meters in diameter. It was moving at 40,000 miles an hour, 65,000 kilometers per hour. The explosion is estimated to have been about 300 kilotons. So that's 20 times the power of the bomb that was used on Hiroshima in this one meteorite. It injured about 1,000 people. Much of that was from breaking glass, from the time between seeing the light, going to the window, and then the shockwave breaking the glass on people. Currently, there is no systemic program to try to find objects of this size. And there was absolutely no warning before this event. Nobody knew this was coming. All of a sudden, we saw it. Very last minute. Russian Deputy Prime Minister Dmitry Rogozin called for the U.S. and Russia to collaborate on finding such objects in advance and on defending us by preventing them from reaching our planet. In the fall of 2011, Rogozin had called for an SDE, a strategic defense of the Earth, both on missile defense and on planetary defense from these outside threats. Russian state television quoted him, what he said the response was to his earlier offer. He said that the response was skepticism. That can't happen because it can never happen. There was a certain amount of criticism and many people laughed, is what he said. Now, NASA estimates that there are about 10 million near-Earth objects that are smaller than 30 meters across, like the one that exploded over Russia today. 10 million of them. Among these objects of that size, we've found about 1,000. So this is 0.01% of them that we know about so far. For objects that are larger, 30 to 100 meters across, we've found about 2,000 out of the estimated 500,000. So for objects of that size, we're doing a little bit better, but we only know of 0.4% of them. It would be very unfortunate to discover something of that size by it striking the Earth. And currently, as I said before, there's no comprehensive plan to deflect such objects or even to find them. I mean, every day 80 tons of material enters our atmosphere. We're really not doing our work on this. Now, this topic of planetary defense is coming up significantly. It was the feature idea between on the fall-winter 2012 issue of 21st Century magazine, which included proposals for international cooperation. Next month is the 30th anniversary of President Reagan's proposal for the SDI, which could be expanded to the SDE today, as Rogozin had said. And today, let me give you the response of Lamar Smith, the chairman of the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee. Chairman Smith said that today's events are a stark reminder of the need to invest in space science. Developing technology and research that enable us to track objects like this is critical to our future. We should continue to invest in systems that identify threatening asteroids and develop contingencies, if needed, to change the course of an asteroid headed towards Earth. Now, at this point, given our current technologies, even with more funding in our current types of telescopes, we might be able to find more of them, but the response, the dealing with contingencies, at this point we're limited to evacuations, which that's helpful, that's better than just being hit, but barring developments of higher energy flux densities and our general power over nature, we're not going to be able to really do much else besides give over a city to being hit and evacuate it in time. So Given the events that took place today, I'd like to know what you think the political implications are in getting these things happening.
Well, it goes back to the earlier part of the 1970s, with the founding of a thermonuclear faction, shall we say, as a scientific group, and on the basis of discussions that we had in that context, and there were lots of them, what we began to look at the question of defense, both military defense as such, and also campaigning against the threat flowing from attempts in thermonuclear warfare, in the direction of thermonuclear warfare. So I had some contacts which I had during the summer of that year, after I had gone through my presidential campaign, which is based on this same issue, the issue of preventing thermonuclear warfare as occurring among nations. And we had an impact on that. We weren't very popular for that, but we had an impact. And this led, in the course of the latter part of the 1970s, where I continued this initiative for space defense. And I began to get some old senior people of my generation or slightly older came around and began coming around and saying, let's work together. So this led to what became well, I had also whole lots of people in Germany with military and related backgrounds, in Spain, partly, notably in France among the Gaullists, among some Italian veterans and so forth. And we actually were able to initiate a support in the direction of establishing a campaign for what we call the Strategic Defense Initiative. Now, the Strategic Defense Initiative is actually a sort of a bisexual thing. It, on the one hand, is used for defense against weapon systems. On the others, it's out for a defense of Earth from other kinds of threats. And so you had this division that came up eventually between SDI and SDE, the Strategic Defense Initiative and the Strategic Defense of Earth. So these two things went. Now the entire term of President Ronald Reagan, beginning with what happened in 1983, I was in touch with this whole crowd from the time that before Reagan was actually installed as president. And I was in touch with the whole group there, and also with some key Russian sources and other sources, where we were conniving in the sense, let's do this. Let's do it. Let's save mankind from this. This is horrible. We've got to do it. We've got to do this. And so that before Reagan was actually inaugurated, we were pretty well on the road with this one. Then, at a somewhat later point, we had then what happened is Reagan actually made the public proposal. And then it was rejected by the Soviet Union. About a British agent inside the Soviet services, really, is what he was. And Gorbachev was the same thing. So we lost the battle then. We could have had it. We were close to it with the Soviet circles. We had very close proximity to coming to an agreement or some kind of agreement on this project. But it was stopped. It was blocked. And you know what happened to me as a result of my starting it. They didn't like what I was doing very much at all. But now it comes back to the same thing. It's on a more advanced thing. This problem we've been faced now from the Siberian experience is much more very significant because it's new. It's something that has not been caught up on recently, as it should have been, because of the lack of the resources in this direction. And we're now at a point where this is extremely important. I don't know what we can do in terms of assured prevention of such incidents again. But I know that what we have to do in any case is we have to develop such a system and start right now. And this presents difficulties which don't exist in the ordinary kind of thing we deal with in terms of dealing with asteroids or other things in our space. So it's a new It's a new problem in a sense because it's newly presented. It always has existed there. It may have been underappreciated. But now, if there's any sense in government, this matter is going to be considered by the leading nations of the planet. Because while Russia in Russian territory has a very special vulnerability in this respect, nonetheless the vulnerability is widespread. It's in North America as well as elsewhere. So this is what we have to do in terms of our concerns. We have to take this, recognize this, and this means a general change in the whole policy of our government in particular. Everything that we've been doing now, in a sense, has to be canceled because it has to be superseded. This is very serious. And we are hit on a vulnerable flank for which no present defense has been established on a global basis. And therefore, doing something about this now is on the first rank of importance.
Okay, well, I'm glad that you went through that history because it's notable that in 1988 you gave an address, the famous Kempinski Hotel address, and in that address I'd say you made a number of forecasts. Among them you repeated a forecast you made in 1983 in the context of the Strategic Defense Initiative proposal, saying if the Soviet Union does not agree to cooperate with the United States on this proposal, they will collapse in about 5 years. You repeated that forecast of the collapse of the Soviet Union again in 1988, at which point, I mean, through 1989. Through 92, you did see the collapse of an entire system, at which point you stated that the Western system of what grew to become globalization, our current system, would be the next shoe to drop. And I mean, you've illustrated here very clearly what we're facing in terms of the crisis, but there is one thing that I would like to add in, which is there are a lot of people who think you're exaggerating when you talk about hyperinflation. And there's going to be a report published soon in Executive Intelligence Review, and then also picked up on the LaRouche PAC site, on what's been happening with food. And just some of these, within the past year, you've seen feed for animals is going up. Just to buy a chicken, for a whole chicken in the grocery store, 21% higher in December 2012 than December 2011. And the only reason that beef prices, milk prices haven't gone through the roof is because this past season, the farmers and the ranchers were liquidating were killing their cows en masse. But again, just this summer, June to August, corn futures went from $5.50 to $8.50 on the Chicago Board of Trade, and so you're seeing this obviously creeping up, and I'd just like you to address two questions. First of all, what do you tell these people who think you're overstating the hyperinflation case, and then also, does your forecast that the Western system would be the second shoe to drop, does that still hold?
Mm-hmm. The problem is the education of our people, including our academic population, including scientific academic population. What the problem is that we are trained to believe that mankind is simply another animal. Now, what I mean by saying that is that animal species, as distinct from human species, are not capable of consciousness of a future. It doesn't exist with the animal. The animal may become terrified as they think they're being killed, out of just a same fear reaction. But the ability to recognize a threat as developing, which is going to come down upon the population, the animals cannot do that. Only human beings can do that. Now, the irony is that most human beings on the planet today can't. Now, it's not because they're not capable of doing that. It's because they're conditioned not to believe they are capable of doing that. And only a few people, which I'm a typical case, is able to think in terms of the future, of what the future means, how you get a preemptive sense of what the future is going to bring. And that's been my skill for a long time, since my early days of forecasting back in the 1960s. And it's always worked. I've never made a mistake as such, because it's very easy when you recognize that you have this ability to respond to these kinds of things. You know you have it, and you will, when you get the experience, you will be critical of what your experience is, but you will eventually probably go with it. You may wait, as I have many times. You wait and say, well, maybe it's not going to happen this way. Maybe I'm wrong on this one. But I've generally managed to make a number of major forecasts relative to what other people were doing, as in 1971. It was my big success was the 71-72 period, where I was the champion who knew everything about the world's economy. The others were all going, because they never had understood this. They never had accepted this. And most of them didn't believe. Most people today do not believe. They do not recognize that human beings actually have an insight into the future. What they do, you'll find most people will say they will use statistical method. They will take a probabilistic method based on statistical method and will say that's what determines the future. Now what that means is they're incompetent to understand the real future. And so that's where this thing comes into being. And that's why many people, because they are stupefied by this particular doctrine that they've been indoctrinated into, they don't realize that the human species is capable of foreseeing the future. Now this is, if you think the case of leading scientists who've made major discoveries in physical science, they all have gone into the future. Einstein went into the future, Max Planck went into the future, and so forth. So the ability of people, and this also applies in other cases for physical science. There are people who are generally called scientists or other kinds of similar kinds of skill who are capable of responding to the future, something that has not yet happened. And that's what I do. And I'm good at it. And I get people very angry at me because I am good at it. And they don't like people going around their backs and telling them what's going to happen to them. But that's my specialty. I have always been able to foresee, ever since I was younger, much younger, always been able to see and recognize that there is a human ability which does not exist in animals to foresee the future in a certain sense, in a certain way. It's not like some crazy model that pops out of the sky, but there are definite ways in which you know that. You simply recognize something, and you recognize the evidence is there, and you see that has a future consequence. And that's all there is to it, as I have done tonight here. I said things that are true. They're absolutely true. I know they're true. They involve the future. I know what the future is. And it's not a matter of something mystical. It's a matter of simply knowing your business.
One more question for you. So, this is a follow-up on discussion from last week and longer than that, but ever since the D.C. Appeals Court ruling that nullified the decision of the National Labor Relations Board on the basis of its members not having been properly confirmed by the Senate, there's been an increasing motion, it seems, in the Congress against Obama's usurpation of complete power. For example, just this week, the book Benghazi, the definitive report, came out. which described that what was actually going on in Benghazi is that a small group of joint special JSOC operators was running weapons transfers, performing targeted assassinations. Basically, a group that was answerable really only to Obama was performing military actions outside of the general military framework. That this was going on, that Ambassador Stevens didn't know about it, and that possibly the attack that took his life was retaliation for these other operations taking place that the White House has never confirmed or discussed. Now, at the Brennan confirmation hearing, Senator Wyden, who had authored the letter brought up last time, he asked a very simple question. He said, based on the memo that we've seen and some others that only some senators have seen, is there really any reason you couldn't use that argument? Is there any reason you couldn't use that argument to kill an American in America? Because the memo was about overseas drone strikes, etc. Is there any legal reason that that wouldn't apply inside the United States? Brennan wouldn't answer. Now, Senator Rand Paul brought that up. He was on CNN's State of the Union, and he said that Senator Wyden had asked whether it was possible to do drone strikes in the U.S., and Brennan spent 5 minutes talking about transparency, but he never answered the question. Senator Paul said, until I get an answer on whether or not you can kill an American citizen in America, then he won't let things move forward. He said that if someone's acting against the country, put them on trial for treason, but have a trial. The president, a politician, he said, whether Republican or Democrat, should not get to decide someone's death by flipping through flashcards saying, do we want to kill him? I don't know. Yeah, let's go ahead and kill him. Bruce Fein said this week, you can't have democracy and the rule of law if you never get to know what the facts are, and you just have to accept that the government says what they are. If you don't have a trial, that's the definition of tyranny. He said this is what we had under Stalin, under Mao. Is that what we want to have in the U.S.? You know, how can you hide a legal memo? Senator Feinstein, the chair of the Senate Select Intelligence Committee, said that she finds it unacceptable that only 2 of the Office of Legal Counsel memos have been made available, 2 out of the 9 that we know of, have been made available to the senators. She said, we need all of those memos. Our staffs need to get to see them. It's unacceptable to have a legal memo about whether something's legal or not and then make that secret. So, you know, we've also got, just one last thing, Congressman Frank Wolf from this area of Virginia. He's got House Resolution 36 calling for a select committee like Watergate or Iran-Contra on Benghazi. He's saying, look, it's been 5 months. There's no real moves to investigate what happened and bring the people who did it to justice. You know, the Hagel and Brennan nominations are jammed up in the Senate. As Leander was bringing up, Jack Lew was being questioned on Glass-Steagall. Manchin brought up Glass-Steagall. So, in other words, it seems that there is motion in the Congress. My question to you is this something, you never should just be glad about something that seems to be nice happening. I mean, we got a war to win. But how do you see the importance of these kinds of matters in regards to the importance of Glass-Steagall right now?
What you're talking about is a breakdown of government, which at the present time is largely associated with the current president. This president is probably the most illegal president we've ever had in the United States, and we've had some real clunkers. And that's what the situation is. And the problem is that, as I see it, we don't have many people with guts. Now, I don't mean guts in the sense of bravado. I mean, when you know a crime is being committed, you know that lives are being placed in jeopardy by that crime. You know generally who or what is doing it. You know you have the information. You know that other people either don't share the information or they are afraid to present it, which is a popular case today in the United States. So I have always considered it an obligation to tell the truth if it's important when other people lack the guts to do so. Now, that is not just something you get a reward for from the outside. It's something you get an inner reward for. Because if you find that you have the guts to say what others would not have the courage to say, and if it's important, then you have the advantage of honor, which the others do not. And the advantage of honor is you have affirmed that you have a mind that works, that is not clouded by fears.
Well, on those words, I think I would like to bring this webcast to a conclusion. I thank you very much tonight, Lynn, for what you've said. I think you've shocked a lot of people. And I thank you for tuning in and watching tonight. I thank Jason and Leandra for participating. Please continue to tune in on Friday nights for our continuing series of live webcasts. Thank you very much, and stay tuned to LPAC TV. That brings our webcast to a conclusion.